The story of Thanksgiving in the United States begins long before the country existed and long before the word Thanksgiving meant a national holiday. To understand how it grew into one of the most important American traditions, you have to step back into a world where two cultures were about to collide, both struggling for survival in a land full of danger and opportunity. The roots of the holiday reach into the experiences of indigenous nations who had lived on the continent for thousands of years. They had developed stable societies, trade networks and political systems, and they knew how to handle the land, its weather and its changing seasons. When Europeans arrived, they encountered people who already understood how to grow crops, hunt local animals and manage harsh winters. Everything the settlers would later learn about survival came through these communities, sometimes through cooperation, sometimes through conflict, and sometimes through uneasy negotiation. The specific story that Americans associate with Thanksgiving usually begins in 1620 when a group of English settlers known as the Pilgrims sailed across the Atlantic on a ship called the Mayflower. They left England and the Netherlands with a goal that was a mix of religious freedom, economic hardship and the desire for a new life. After a rough voyage that lasted more than 2 months, they landed far north of where they had planned. Instead of arriving near the mouth of the Hudson River, they reached Cape Cod. They were tired, sick, low on supplies and completely unsure of how they would survive the coming winter. Their first months in the new land were brutal. Freezing temperatures, disease, and the lack of food killed nearly half of the settlers by the time spring arrived. The Pilgrims had arrived in a land controlled by the Wampanoag people, who had faced their own tragedies shortly before the English arrived. Epidemics brought by earlier European contact had devastated many indigenous communities. In the decades following the Revolution, Thanksgiving remained a scattered tradition rather than a unified national event. Some states celebrated it annually, usually in New England, where the memory of the Pilgrims carried strong cultural weight. Families gathered for meals, sermons were delivered in churches and communities treated the day as a moment to pause and reflect. Other states ignored it entirely, either because they had their own local traditions or because they saw Thanksgiving as a New England custom that did not reflect the diversity of the growing nation. The South, in particular, showed little interest, viewing it as a regional religious observance rather than a shared national ritual. As the country expanded westward, different communities brought their own customs, foods and celebrations. Without national leadership, Thanksgiving stayed uneven, respected by many but not practiced everywhere. This changed slowly through culture, media, and the persistent effort of one influential writer. Sarah Josepha Hale, an editor, author and one of the most powerful voices in 19th-century American publishing, believed deeply in the value of a national Thanksgiving. She saw it as a way to create unity in a young and often divided country. Hale was already famous for her role in editing major magazines and for writing children's literature, including the well-known poem, Mary Had a Little Lamb. Her editorial work reached hundreds of thousands of households, giving her the ability to shape public conversation. She used this platform to promote the idea that Thanksgiving should become a national holiday observed by all states on the same day. For decades, she wrote editorials, published recipes, recommended customs, and wrote letters to governors and presidents urging them to adopt her proposal. Hale believed Thanksgiving could strengthen families, promote morality, and unite citizens. She also liked the connection to early colonial history and the symbolic power of. The modern era of Thanksgiving reflects a blend of tradition, commercial influence, family ritual, and evolving cultural understanding. While the holiday's roots are tied to colonial history and early American storytelling, its place in contemporary life is shaped by changes in society, technology, and cultural awareness. As new generations grow up, the way they engage with Thanksgiving shifts, but the day still holds a special place in the American calendar. It remains one of the few moments when people across the country pause at the same time, gather with family or friends, and reflect on gratitude. Even for those who do not observe it in a religious sense, the day carries meaning simply through its focus on connection and appreciation. One of the biggest forces shaping Thanksgiving in recent decades has been the influence of travel. The holiday has become the busiest travel period in the United States. Millions of people drive, fly, or take trains to reunite with loved ones. This mass movement creates a unique national moment when airports overflow, highways slow down and people endure long waits just to be in the same room with family. The effort people put into traveling highlights the emotional importance of Thanksgiving. Even those who only travel once a year often choose this holiday as the priority. Over time, this has turned Thanksgiving into not just a day of gratitude but also a day of return, where people temporarily step away from their routines to reconnect with their roots. At the same time, Thanksgiving has continued to evolve as a culinary tradition. While the classic expected dishes remain central, such as turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce and pumpkin pie, the American melting pot has expanded what appears on the table. Many families include foods from their cultural backgrounds. Mexican-American households may serve tamales. Italian-American families often include pasta dishes. Asian-American homes might feature rice, noodles or. The continuing story of Thanksgiving in the United States reveals as much about the country's identity as it does about its past. At its core, the holiday brings people together, but around it sits a wide range of emotions, questions and evolving cultural practices. As society changes, Thanksgiving mirrors those shifts, illustrating how a nation interprets tradition through new generations. The holiday that began in the complexity of 17th-century survival now stretches across a landscape shaped by technology, immigration, social movements and global influence. It remains familiar, yet it never stops developing. One of the most noticeable changes in recent decades is the growing awareness of how history is represented. Many Americans now seek a fuller understanding of indigenous experiences beyond the simplified story that dominated textbooks for so long. Museums, cultural centers, and educators work with indigenous nations to present a more complete picture of early encounters between European settlers and native communities. The Wampanoag, whose ancestors met the Pilgrims in 1621, have taken a central role in sharing their own histories. They explain how their society worked, how disease devastated their population before the settlers arrived, and how the alliance with the Pilgrims was shaped by necessity rather than simple friendship. They also highlight the long struggles that followed, including land loss, cultural suppression and political conflict. This shift has encouraged many families to acknowledge these realities during their Thanksgiving gatherings. Some include prayers or reflections that honor indigenous peoples. Others read statements recognizing the original inhabitants of the land where they live. These gestures do not rewrite history, but they encourage a broader understanding and help bring voices into the conversation that were historically excluded. The holiday becomes not only a time of gratitude but also a moment of awareness, connecting prayers.